I think you can't say it's the end of partnership because we have to work with Russia. However difficult, we have, we are the world's two nuclear superpowers. We have to work with Russia on pressing global issues such as Iran, Syria, right now, post-2014 Afghanistan, and ideally things like the future of the Arctic and climate change and those kinds of issues too. So we can't say no more partnership, but I think at the moment we're obviously in a very, very low point, probably the lowest since the collapse of the Soviet Union. But the issues, the current issue, which is the future of Ukraine, that's been one of the themes running throughout the last 22 years is what do we do about the post-Soviet space?
So let me sort of come back to, in some sense, your book and where, and in some sense, the big questions that we started with. And this is, again, a question that comes from the audience. There is, I think, some apprehension that you feel out there that maybe we're heading towards, again, a new Cold War with Russia, that all of the progress that we made towards building some degree of partnership with Russia in the last 20-odd years is now in danger of being flushed away, and that we're going to be heading into a period of long, icy relations with Russia. Is that too pessimistic of you?
Well, it feels like the Cold War with some of the rhetoric that's going around, but it's not the Cold War. We don't have our nuclear weapons targeted at each other, although I guess we could if we wanted to. We're not ideological antagonists trying to kind of carve up the world between communism and capitalism. So that's really different. And then the real difference is Russia is integrated into the global economy in a way that the Soviet Union wasn't. And therefore, policies that Russia pursues have economic repercussions. And so you had the Russian stock market tank after the occupation of Crimea. The value of the ruble fell. Now it's come up again because people feel that maybe it's not going to move beyond Crimea. But that works both ways too, which is, again, you see that you can is the economy, are we now with mutual economic deterrence? We used to have mutual assured destruction. Is it the economic relationship that's where there's a parallel? Because what you now have is we can threaten sanctions and the Europeans can, but as I've said, we're going to lose as well, and the Europeans are going to lose a lot more if they're tough sanctions. The Russians will lose too. So in a sense, this economic integration and Russia being part of the global economy really does change the way that everyone interacts with each other, and it actually, constrains the ability of either side to punish the other one too much.
So even given the Russian concerns about Crimea, and having been there, and having been to Sevastopol, I understand what that means to the Russians. But even then, I would say, having taken the step to send Russian forces into Crimea and holding this referendum on the potential independence of Crimea or the joining of Crimea to Russia is an escalation beyond the levels that the Russians have been willing to go previously. What do you think happens next, presuming they get the outcome that they're looking for?
Right. Well, I should also say, I think one of the reasons why Russia did this is because Mr. Putin thought that he had negotiated an agreement with Mr. Yanukovych in November, that Mr. Yanukovych would not sign an agreement with the European Union. He was going to accept a $15 billion loan, economic assistance from Russia. And he might have then thought about joining an alternative body that President Putin is trying to create, the Eurasian Union. And so President Putin thought that he had a deal worked out, and then when all of this happened, suddenly that deal was up in smoke, and the whole question of Ukraine's orientation was reopened. Plus, one of the first acts that this interim government did was to pass a law demoting the use of the Russian language in Ukraine. Now, that hasn't been implemented, but the parliament passed it, and I think that was also quite a provocative move, and I think that also fed into Russian decision-making. The outside world will be presented with this fait accompli. And even though I very much doubt that either the United States or the Europeans or too many, or the Chinese for that matter, they have their own issues with separatism, whether anyone is going to recognize the incorporation of Crimea into the Russian Federation, will continue to deal with Russia, and those will be new facts on the ground.
So if you were sitting in the White House these days, if you were advising the president, what would be your sort of bottom line right now about the message that he should be sending to President Putin?
Well, I think the message has to be that whatever happens with Crimea, and assuming that Crimea then joins Russia, that has to be it. that there cannot be any further erosion of Ukraine's territorial integrity. I mean, that would seem to be the bottom line. And then I think the message has to be, we have to start talking about better ways to regulate that. But again, it's not going to be an easy conversation.